Hello and welcome to today's live webinar from Astrix Technology called Transformation of the Laboratory, a perspective on laboratory information management systems, or LIMS. Next slide, please. And before we get into today's session, and before I turn it over to our very capable speaker today, I want to take a few moments and just tell you a little bit about Astrix. If you've never attended one of our webinars before, or if you don't have any direct experience with us, who are we? We're an informatics professional services and strategic outsourced solutions company dedicated solely to the scientific community. A few quick stats about the company. It was established in 1995. It's privately held, and it originated as the IT division of a company called APBI Life Science, which was a research organization. Today we operate from 7 offices in the United States and beautiful Costa Rica, and our headquarters are in Red Bank, New Jersey. A couple of things about the life cycle of solutions that Astrix provides. As a whole, what we like to say is we help accelerate the digital transformation of the lab, and certainly laboratories today are going through a massive sea change in technology, and we're right on the forefront of that. And we offer a variety of services to help support that. Everything from the beginning, like business process analysis and enterprise architecture, this is going in and helping companies understand what they need. So they're not blindly walking in and looking at hundreds of technologies and not sure where to start. Then we get into laboratory technology selection services. From there, once we have helped you select a suite of solutions, we can do everything from development and implementation to the computer systems validation post-implementation. And then post-implementation, we have services that can help sustain and manage those systems, and then even potentially staff the resources necessary to run those systems, or to just staff resources in your laboratory in general. At the end of the day, we evaluate, implement, and manage systems to enhance the collection and processing of consistent and persistent scientific data. So I want to turn it over to the very capable hands of Robert Walla. Robert is the Vice President of Professional Services here at Astrix. He is responsible for the growth and strategic direction of the Professional Services Division, and he has over 25 years of experience in laboratory informatics, which include overseeing very large global informatics projects. Mr. Walla brings a BS in chemistry from Rutgers University. Rob, I'll let you take it over, and I'll come back on at the end.
Great, Kevin. Thanks so much for that introduction. And again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk a lot today about digital transformation and specifically how LIMS plays a role in that. But the thing about digital transformation, it's pretty interesting. Probably every conversation with clients that I have these days, whether it's a digital transformation conversation or somewhere else, DT typically is involved in some way, shape, or form. And the interesting thing about it is that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Of the services, especially the ones that Kevin just touched on, if you pick any one of those, at a high level, people understand what you're talking about, right? So if you say, hey, we do validation, or a client comes to us and says, we have a validation project, pretty much for a high level, you understand what that means and what the conversation is going to be about. Same thing with maybe business process analysis. Certainly when you get into things like integration of systems, right? Client calls up and says, hey, I want to talk to you about integration. You pretty much know where the conversation is going to go. Digital transformation is different. When I get asked to speak with a client or a group about digital transformation, I really don't know what's in their mind or how they define it. And so I always start it out by, hey guys, happy to talk to you about it, but tell me what DT means to you and where you are in your journey. So I thought, with that in mind, I thought we'd start off with a definition of digital transformation. This is borrowed directly from Wikipedia. So basically, it's the adoption of digital technologies to transform the services of a business, replacing non-digital processes or maybe older ones, right? So that makes a lot of sense at that level. But I think the important part of this definition is really one word, which is transform. You can certainly implement systems, and people have been doing it in our space and in the scientific space in decades. Or you capture data, you store it, you process it, you report it, that's fine. But is it really transforming your business? And I think that's really the big difference now, over the last couple of years, as opposed to maybe 30 years ago when I worked in the laboratory. I guess I'm dating myself, but where it's just more about, getting out of paper. The thing about digital transformation, though, it's not just technologies. I mean, we're going to talk about technologies just certainly, but when you go through a digital transformation process, there's other components of that. There's processes, right, that you're looking to digitize or maybe transform in a day. And certainly there's people not only that are going to be part of this process, but how they're going to interact with potentially new processes and certainly to technology. So those three kind of legs of the stool there, we'll talk a little bit about that, is all part of your digital transformation. You know, there's a lot of moving parts there. You have technology, you have processes, you know, you have people. So how do you get started with all of this? And, you know, it's a big question that we at Astrix get asked a lot. All right, I know I need to do this. I've got some ideas, I've got some objectives, but where do I start? And we always say, hey, start with a strategy. A lot of times, I think it's just natural. You know, I'm a scientist, many of you folks are. Yeah, I think that it's just natural. Hey, let's talk about the tools, you know, that I need to do my day-to-day work, whether it's a LIMS or an ELN or something like that. And it kind of makes a lot of sense just kind of from where we come from. We're sort of wired that way. But you know, you got to take a step back. It's not necessarily just only a product, but you got to start with some vision, some objectives. And we always say, let's get a strategy in place of what digital transformation it means to you. And you know, this could be big. We're working on one right now with a client, actually two, that are major global digital transformation projects, and they're big. They'll be multi-year, multi-year. Where other ones maybe just will focus on a part of a business, part of a a division, or maybe just one laboratory in particular. But it's very important to understand where you want to start and with the journey. And there's really no right or wrong answer to that. But it's about laying out, where you want to be at the end of this process. And we always say, pick that and then focus on the outcomes. At the end of the day, when all is said and done, where do you want to be and what do you want to get out of it? What questions do you want to answer? And then, once you understand that, you can pick the process or processes that you map end to end as part of your process. And really the goal here is to be able to gain access to real-time data at the end of this, throughout the entire. It's all about the data. Now we're going to talk about the systems that are used to collect that data, but going through a digital transformation type of process is about digitizing this data so that you have access of that data and you can make decisions on that data. And it's not just one part of the process, but it's like how data starts. Where do you collect it, and how does that data get transferred throughout the entire life cycle of your business or a part of your business? Once you start to understand that and you can act on that data, then you start to really see how it can go transform your business or other part of that business. So really, when you start to look at this, it's all about now outlining what a potential architecture could look like for you. Now, this is not an architecture presentation. We have a whole other series on that. But as you start to get into talk about digital transformation, at some point in time, architecture comes into play. Because you'll need to understand the different systems that could be potentially collecting this data and how do they all interact together. So this is part of the strategy to lay out not only what are my goals in this process, but what potential systems may I need, what data are they going to collect, how does the data get from one to the other if necessarily, and where will we be able to start to use and make decisions. So a typical architecture will look like that. Certainly not like this, right? You don't want to build a house of cards that potentially, will certainly topple over, and start to put something in place that can support your digital transformation project. So really, if you look at success factors, there's three main components. It's the people that are going to be involved in it, both from a vision and roadmap perspective, right? Maybe sponsors of your digital transformation project, and certainly the people that are going to be involved as you go through the project itself. And the processes will be very, very important to this, because you'll have to look at how you're doing it now, how you may want to transform that process more into a 2B type of an architecture to support that, and then what the technology are you going to infuse into that to start to collect this data. And we always say, folks, data is the data that you collect and the data that you process in your day-to-day work. There's a lot of value in that, but that could be collected a lot of different ways. So it's not necessarily about the systems right off the bat. It's about understanding that data, and then eventually, the systems that can collect it efficiently, process it efficiently, that will fall out. So we always look at this, kind of from a balanced model perspective: people, processes, and technology. And when you're not in a balanced situation, it's like kind of three legs of a stool. in an unbalanced model, that will certainly not support the business and the objectives that it has going forward. So, when you look at, a successful digital transformation collaboration, there's a lot of components, right? There's the corporate components, management, within a business. You're working with the stakeholders, your IT folks, the parts of the business to lay out a proper roadmap, and then eventually, getting into partnerships with the right informatics partners for the systems that you're going to need to support this. So, at some point in time, if you don't have it already, you'll have to go through an evaluation selection process in order to, pick the right technologies to support your DT project. And today we're going to talk about the LIMS. And the LIMS, I think, is somewhat unique because, there's a lot of systems and laboratories, as you know, but in the LIMS space, there's a lot of different ones out there. Which one will work right for you? So, once you kind of understand, the data and your objectives, now it's about, well, what system out there can, help me support that? And, Astrix here, we do a lot of this. We have a whole methodology, and I can give a whole webinar just on this, in and of itself. I'll touch on it today, but, there's a lot of components about, finding the right technology. Business process mapping, which will lead into your business requirements analysis. Finding the right systems out there, through some sort of request for proposal or request for information, and eventually a product demonstrations. So just a quick look at some process maps. When we help our clients select the right technology, we typically go through this process, laying out the as-is, and what you're seeing here in this eye chart is an actual example of an as-is that we've done for clients. And then we work with them in order to come up with a to-be. So the as-is, there's a lot of heavy lifting, that we do, but the client is very, very much engaged in this as-is part of the process. And then Astrix goes away, our experts go away to develop a few straw models for 2Bs that we share with the clients. There's an iterative process where we go back and forth before we dial in, to the right one. And again, very, very important because this starts to lay out kind of that data transformation I talked about a little bit earlier. Now, how's data going to come into a process? What data? Where are you getting it from? What steps does it have to go through? What transformations, if any, does it go through? And when it comes out on the end of this 2B, is that the end of the data? Does it get stored? Does it move on to another part of the business? This is what all the questions that you can answer when you start to do an effort such as this. Once that has been done and completed, now it's all about saying, okay, what functionality does this system need to do? What functionality does this LIMS system needs to do? And again, when we work with clients on this, it's all about getting down to the right level of granularity for these requirements. If you're doing this yourself, that's great. A lot of our clients do, but you have to have the right skill sets in order to do this. Our scientific business analysts are scientists, the technology folks, and they help drive these requirements meetings. It's not just about talking to the users and saying, hey, what do you want the system to do? Anybody can do that, but getting into, okay, I understand you do this type of workflow. Well, tell me about it. Have you ever thought about doing it this way? Why are you doing it this way and not that way? And kind of bringing best practices to this. One way that we do it, if we get engaged with a client, is by using some of our IP. And I'm talking about the Astrix requirements database, where we have requirements of every process, every project that we've ever collected. And we use this as a template before we get started, kind of thinking it as best practices in your industry to help drive this process and reduce the amount of time that it would take. So, you'll need to spend time with the groups, each of the stakeholder groups, through, but the time that you take to do this will pay dividends throughout your entire project. I often make an analogy that your requirement is kind of like a foundation if you're building a house, right? Take the time making sure your foundation is correct, because if you don't, then you're going to have problems through the entire construction. It's very similar when you go through a process like this. So once you have your process maps, once you have your requirements, now it's all about finding the right LIMS system out there for you. And there's a lot of them, right? You probably Google it or talk to people in the industry. There's probably 80 or so to 100 or so different LIMS systems or LIMS type systems out there. So we go through a process of developing a proposal, or sometimes it's called an RFI, that will go out to the vendor community. We start with developing a vendor list of potential vendors that could meet your requirements. typically on an average of a half a dozen to 10 on a typical search of our database. We will send this, we will develop that RFP, which contains a variety of different components, process, business overview of who you are, what you do, what your organization is like, type of workflows, obviously all the requirements and process maps go into the RFP, and then that gets sent out to the vendor community. Now, as part of this process, when we're working with a client like doing this, there will be other deliverables that we'll provide to the client: evaluation selection plans, scoring sheets, scoring guidance documents, really everything that you would need in order to go through a process of taking the entire vendor community, start shortlisting it, and eventually bring folks into vendor demonstrations. The vendor demonstration, the product demonstration, portion of a project like this is very important. This is kind of where you start to see now how your requirements are being implemented in the system. The one thing about these product demonstrations is it's not a sales demonstration. We keep these as very, very consistent between the different vendors, and the way we do that is what you're seeing on the screen here with using demonstration scripts, where a vendor will go through step by step through each of these scripts and performing the functionality and the features that are part of them. And then we go through a scoring process. You can see that on the right-hand side there, where we score the different categories or evaluation criteria for the different vendors. And this will be a starting point, these scores, for discussion with the client and eventual selection. So, at that point in time, you have your tool. Now it's all about optimizing it and implementing it within your organization. So, it's not just enough to buy the technology, but it's about getting it implemented, correctly. Working with a vendor or working with a third party like us in order to get that implemented. And one thing that we always tell clients is that LIMS projects are difficult, so don't make it over difficult. Simplify it wherever you can, because complexity will kill you. But what you don't want to do, and the last point there is, you don't want to just push complexity into a different domain. Meaning, so you're in an area of your business, you're working in a certain laboratory, something is complex. It's not just about, all right, I want to simplify my area, I'll make it complex for the guy before me or the guy after me. If you run into a complex situation, well, let's figure it out. But wherever possible, simplify that implementation. And there's a few ways to do that. What we always tell clients is that you've got pain points in your laboratory, some different than others, right? And some of these pain points are real pain points. You run into it every single day. Other ones are just maybe minor nuisances. But match the LIMS strength to your pain point. So if you have trouble tracking samples, for example, well, LIMS are really good at that. Okay. So, focus on developing workflows around that, or if aggregating data and providing that to clients or other parts of the business is a pain point for you. Well, LIMS is really good at that as well, right? Developing reports or dashboards or downloads, whatever that may be. So there's certainly ways that you can do that very efficiently. The other thing is about looking at actions that you do day in and day out when you start to think about automating. It's natural that you get a system and it's all shiny and new, you take it out of the box and you're like, wow, this is great. Well, we want to automate everything, right? And it's a lofty goal, but our counsel is that look at actions that you do every day. So if you do, and your colleagues are working in the lab and you do it 10 times a day every day, well, that's probably a pretty good candidate for automating, as opposed to maybe there is a function, a workflow, whatever it may be, that it's a very specific thing and you do it once a month or once every quarter. You really have to think about, is it worth putting the time, the effort, the money into automating a process like that? The other thing is that just don't run out and start configuring workflows for everything that you do. We always look at implement a critical workflow or critical workflows first, and live with it for a while and see what else may be needed. Again, to implement functionality into a LIMS system, it costs. There's either internal cost for you doing it, or cost to pay the vendor to do it. Typically, if you're in a regulated environment, you got validation that goes along with that. So you got to really think about how you build out, what you build out, and when you build it out. So we say do the critical ones first, live it a while, and then needs will come out as people start to use that. And then lastly, and I'm half kidding about this, is get rid of Excel. And what I mean by that is, Excel that we've seen over the years is kind of a crutch, right? It's a blessing and a curse. Great product, obviously, very useful, very easy to use. And you'd be amazed on how many clients that we've gone into to work with, and they have a LIMS. They spent a lot of money on it. They spent a lot of money implementing it, but they still use Excel to do calculations, or maybe graphs, or whatever it may be. And that's just inefficiencies in a digital transformation type of project. It's almost anti-digital transformation when you think about it. And we've seen clients take results out of LIMS systems and put it in Excel to do some sort of calculation and then put the result back into LIMS. And when we ask about this, they say, well, we had this built out, or we're not really sure how to do it in the LIMS. We know how to do it in Excel, so we just continue to do it that way. Well, if the calculator is that important, and this kind of goes back to the repetitious actions. If you do that calculation a lot, spend the time, or if you don't know how to do it, you don't have the skill sets internally, which is great, pay the vendor to implement that in the LIMS. It'll be a lot more efficient to you as you go forward. Now, the whole throw out Excel, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, well, I can't get rid of Excel because this is a very critical part. I can't build it into LIMS, or I can't build it into an ELM. I understand that, but probably for 90% of the times that we see Excel, 99% of the times, you could probably build that into a system that you're using. And the other thing that we talked about with clients is that don't forget that the LIMS can do more than just tracking samples or generating reports. When people think of LIMS, well, that's sort of the first things that kind of come to mind, and I get it. They're designed to do that very well, but LIMS, they do other things as well. They do reagent tracking, asset management, equipment calibration, training records. All of this can be put into to a LIMS system if needed. Again, if these are not part of critical workflows for you, don't build it into a LIMS if you don't need it. But if you do, look at how maybe you can leverage LIMS more than just a typical functionality. But before you do that, look internally and certainly leverage any existing purpose-built systems that you have before configuring the functionality in LIMS. And what I mean by that is that there may be other parts of your organization that have these types of systems, like master control, for example. It does a lot of equipment type of tracking and calibration type of tracking. So there may be parts of your organization that you wouldn't even think that they would have systems that you could use. You work in a laboratory, you do laboratory type of work, but you have a maintenance department or facilities department that may have asset management systems and equipment calibration software. They have to calibrate equipment, and you may be able to use those for your laboratory types of systems. But it's always good to look at what you have in your organization and leverage it before you start again, spending the time and the money to put it into a system. And lastly, what we preach a lot is integrate, integrate, integrate. Again, maybe you'd be surprised, or maybe not, how many times LIMS systems are implemented with very little or actually no integration. I think a lot of the reason for that is that integration is something that we see a lot of people leave to the end, and they run out of time, money, or patience, or a combination of the three. Where, all right, well, we didn't get to integrate all the instruments, we did a few of them, or we didn't get integrated into any of the other systems. But I think when you start to look at optimizing LIMS, an integration strategy should be first and foremost as you start to get into implementing a LIMS system. Really understand where the wins are, and it kind of goes back to the repetitious things that I was saying before. If you use an instrument every single day and it runs hundreds of samples for you in a week, take a look at that and put that on the priority list of integration, as opposed to an instrument maybe you use once a month and it runs a handful of samples, right? Maybe that gets put off to the end, or maybe you don't integrate at all. But it's something that we always say, get an integration strategy, because that's really where you get your bang for the buck, and it really gets you, you can solve the goals and objectives of your digital transformation project, by leveraging a good strategy here. So, just in closing, just coming back to this, digital transformation, there's a lot of moving parts, right? It's not just the systems, but there's people and processes that are part of that. And, it takes a lot to lay out a good digital transformation project and strategy. If you have a group that is designed to do this, that's great. But if not, don't try to go at it alone if you don't have the experience. We could certainly help with that. We do a lot of these on a variety of different levels. I talked about some global ones we're doing. We're doing them for really all sorts of sizes of organizations, which is surprising me. You would think of, well, maybe the big pharma companies, they all have digital transformation, they have to. But you'd be surprised that we're doing this for smaller organizations as well. 50, 100 people. That are relatively startups. That they want to make sure that they lay the groundwork for success, and we certainly help you with that. So, Kevin, with that said, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Rob. And again, as always, great content. We really appreciate that. And again, for folks that weren't on right in the beginning, one of the things I mentioned was we want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you want. Just go into the question panel. It'll be on the right-hand side of your panel, and you can just type it in, and I won't read your name or I won't read your company out. I'll generally just read the questions out loud, and then Rob will do his best to answer them. So I'll stop the recording.